What's good, everybody? Today I want to look into the question of, is it a bad financial investment to buy a lease outright at the end of the lease term? So here's the scenario. You're in the market for a new vehicle. You got it optioned out perfectly how you like it, but when you finance it, you can't afford the monthly. Happens to the best of us. The payment's too high, so you think, okay, let's lease. And you're good with the mileage restrictions, but since you love the vehicle, you know you're going to want to buy it outright after. So, what do those numbers look like? Is it a bad long term investment to do it that way? Well, let's find out. All right. So, for starters, let's get some realistic numbers here. So I picked a Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk here. Surprised you can even lease these things. Pretty badass. But I went to this website, DSR Leasing. They're kind of like an auto broker company who will buy and sell lease deals from dealerships and customers who are in the middle of their leases. I'm not going to get into leases as far as options you have when you lease a vehicle, because that is a whole nother can of worms. But let's look at this one. So they're giving you the MSRP there, the lease term 42 months, monthly payment due at signing. So let's scroll a little further down. So here's some more specific details. The due at signing includes your first month payment, bank acquisition fee, capital cost reduction, and your service fee. So that doesn't include a down payment if you add one, but for simplicity, we're just going to leave it at that. And then it also gives you your residual value right there. So that's good stuff. So now to start the comparison, let's pull up my handy dandy spreadsheet. Little Blues Clues reference there for you on this beautiful Mother's Day. So looking at my spreadsheet, you can tell I modified it quite a bit. Changed the layout. I've got lease terms over here and then buyout terms over here. So again, we got no trade-in. The taxes are per payment. That's the way it works on leases. I just assumed that the payment that they gave includes the taxes, so that's why I got it here. Technically, the payment before tax would have been $1109. Due at signing, I didn't break it out. I just put that number to get on with it. 42 months, and it was 10,000 miles a year. I don't know if I mentioned that. Yeah, there it is. 10,000 per year. That's pretty standard for a nicer vehicle. Something more of a daily driver commuter. You can get 15K a year, stuff like that. So I have the finance charge set to 0 during the lease term, but then I include finance charge on a buyout. So you'll see that's where this interest rate and day count still comes back into play here. So let's just scroll down. So you can see here at 42 months, you no longer have a balance on your lease. Cool. So now, say you want to finance it. So let's go back up. I take your residual value plus your acquisition fee. Now, I did not find this number on DSR's website, so I just came up with $395. That seems fairly reasonable, even though their initial acquisition fee was $695. I think your buyout is usually less. I don't know, talking out of my ass there. Registration costs $120. Those are going to come into play, and you're going to pay taxes on the full amount here. So your new principal, what you're going to be financing, is $42,811. And then as far as a term, what I did is use a 60-month term. So that's here, and what that does is give you a payment of $769. That's a reasonable term in this case because you got to think 42 months has already passed. So 60 months tacked onto that is quite a long time to be paying on a vehicle. So you probably will want to avoid a 72-month term on this one. We're going to get into that a little more later. So you can see there's quite a bit of difference in the monthly payment here. So if you can afford this payment, this will be a cakewalk, and you can some mods that you probably weren't able to do with this payment. Okay, so now let's look at finance. If right out of the gate you want to finance it, let's keep the APR the same, 3%. Registration costs are going to come into play, taxes on the full amount, and then I put a $5,000 down payment because that's more or less what you're putting down for your lease. If I go back to there, due at signing includes that $695. It's your first payment plus $695 acquisition fee. Let's go back and look at it. So this includes all that stuff there. But bottom line is you're paying $5,000 up front. So that's where I'm just going to go ahead and put that number in there. Now, since you're financing it from the beginning, you're probably going to do a longer term, either 75 or 84 months. So let's just stick with 75. Using my goal seek that I love, I got that set to 0, so your payment is $1,305. So right away you can tell there's a fairly significant difference in affordability of the monthly payment, $1,300 versus $1,100, $1,180. So that's some savings. If you're in that tier of monthly payments, that may not be as big of a deal, but if you were to compare that to say $35,000, $40,000 vehicle, $200, that's a bigger percentage on say $500 payment, something like that. So now I already went over this, so let's break it down. So with the cost, we've got the principal of each. So for the lease plus buyout, your lease total of payments is $49,518, and then the principal when you start to finance it is $42,811.05. And then your total finance charge on that buyout is $3,300. So your total's $95,673 for the life of the vehicle, basically, of your loan terms. If you financed it outright at $89,189, which we got that number over here, that's your principal, then your total finance charge is obviously a whole lot more, and your total actually comes out to a little over $2,000 more. Now I put this line here at the bottom because this is the crucial difference here. You're financing this option for 102 months, and this one is only 75. So one thing I did, if we go back to the lease buyout tab, I highlighted this blue row. This is your 75th payment. So you're on this option, you're still looking at $20,000 that you owe on the vehicle, whereas if you financed it, it would be paid off. So what you're sacrificing with this method is potentially being upside down on the value of the car. It's pretty easy to avoid that. You can get a good rate and put a little bit down or pay ahead on the vehicle You know, people who are upside down on their cars typically have high interest rates. That's usually where that comes into play. So to conclude, I probably did not pick the best example for this comparison because the monthly payment difference is really not that much considering how much the payment is to begin with. And on top of that, I would love to see a 30,000 mile Jeep Grand Cherokee Trackhawk that's 3.5 years old and for sale for 39 grand. Like, if that's the case, put me down for two. You know what I mean? But this comparison is more for people who either got into a lease and wish they had bought it for reasons of being able to refinance it or wanting to do modifications, customization stuff to it, which you can really do that with it being a lease. There's no restrictions on that. You know, do anything that can be undone, essentially. I think this comparison sort of debunks the idea that it's a bad idea and it's a bad financial investment, so to speak, because I think if you're in the car you want to be in, because that's what this is all about. It's about getting the car you want, and the only way to afford that is doing the lease first. Well, you know, it's not the end of the world, and you're actually paying less over time potentially. It's just taking you longer to pay. So if you can't afford the monthly finance, then it's a totally viable option to lease it first and buy it out later. The numbers are almost a wash. They're close. The lease plus buyout comes in a little cheaper in this case, but there's a lot of variables that were adjusted that may change in real life. I tried to come up with the most realistic scenario I could come up with, but by the numbers, a true by the numbers comparison would be to make the terms the same, and that would drastically change everything here. If you would basically finance your lease buyout would be like 30 months, and obviously then it would be much cheaper to do it that way. But in reality, you're financing it like a normal car. So I think that's it. Thanks for tuning in to Rev TV, and as always, give me your comments. Let me know what you think.